Krista here with Books and Jams, and Happy New Year! It is January 2018, and it is a new year, and I'm very excited. I have a few things to do to kind of wrap up my 2017 reading, and one of those we're going to talk about today, which is, as you know from the title, my December wrap-up. I'm very proud of myself for not waiting until the middle of January to do this. I'm here at the beginning of the month to share with you the books that I read in the month of December. I read 11 books and listened to one audiobook, so 12 altogether. The first 4 that I'm going to talk about are books that are kind of Christmassy themed. The first of them is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I am very pleased that I finally read this book. I did read it actually on Christmas Day and the day after. On the 23rd, I think it was, I actually watched an adaptation of it that I hadn't seen before with the captain from Star Trek, Jean-Luc Picard. I don't know his actual name, but he was Scrooge, and it was really good. And then when I read this book, I realized what a good adaptation that was, because it was almost exactly the book. I did not connect very much with the writing of Charles Dickens. I found it a little bit confusing, and I wasn't quite sure what he was trying to say a few times, but since I had just seen the adaptation, I was able to figure it out pretty quickly, and I'm glad that I read it, but I'm not jumping right in to read another book by Charles Dickens. I enjoy reading classics, but for some reason his writing is not one that I feel like I can connect with very easily. So that's it for that one. A book that I read for a real life book club that never happened is The Noel Diary by Richard Paul Evans, and he is a very prolific Christmas book author. I think he has more than 10 Christmas books out, and I did not choose this book, someone else did. I didn't really enjoy it. There was actually nothing very Christmassy about the story in particular, except that it happened around Christmas time. The story in this book is that this man, Jacob Churcher, is a prolific author. So he was estranged from his mother, but then she passes away, and he has to return to her house to deal with the insurance, and finds out that she was a hoarder and begins cleaning out her house. In the midst of all that, he's having these dreams of being a child and this dark-haired woman who really loved him, and he doesn't know if it's something that he's made up or if it was real. As he's cleaning out his mom's house, this woman shows up who is also connected to him in some way, and so it's their story and the story of this diary that he finds of this woman who had an impact on him as a child. I found it very predictable, and I don't know, there was just something about it that I didn't connect with. I know that there are people who really loved it, but I didn't really care for it very much. I thought the writing was super cheesy at times, and I laughed out loud at some of the dialogue. It seemed pretty unrealistic to me. So I didn't love this one. It was cute, it was short, but wasn't my favorite. Then I also picked up Let It Snow, which is 3 short stories by John Green, Maureen Johnson, and Lauren Miracle. And this is YA Christmas time stories. So these 3 short stories are separate but also connected. Some of the characters are the same. The first story in this book is called The Jubilee Express by Maureen Johnson. And that one was my favorite. It's about a train that ends up having to stop because of so much snow on the tracks. There's like a massive blizzard. So some of the teenagers on the train hop off the train and go into this town that's right there where they stopped. Not very believable, but just a fun story. And then the second one was A Cheer-tastic Christmas Miracle, which was just silly. Some of the people who left the train was this group of cheerleaders, and they all end up at this pancake house or waffle house or something. And then the kid working at the Waffle House calls his friends to come quickly. There's a group of cheerleaders here. Kind of cheesy. And the third one was The Patron Saint of Pigs, and it's about these 3 friends. One of them realizes that she's pretty self-absorbed and learns how to care more about the people around her. They were cute stories. The one major thing that bothered me is that this supposedly happened in North Carolina. And while I know that North Carolina sometimes gets snow, and maybe it's in a part of North Carolina that is more mountainous, but it just seemed so unrealistic to me that such a massive snowstorm would happen in North Carolina. It just was hard to wrap my mind around such a massive snow event happening in North Carolina, and that bothered me all the way through. It's silly and it's stupid, but what can I say? The 4th Christmassy kind of book that I read is Christmas at Carnton by Tamara Alexander, and this is my favorite of the 4 Christmas books that I read. This is a historical fiction, and it takes place in Tennessee in the midst of the Civil War. This woman lost her husband in one of the battles of the Civil War. He was a Confederate soldier, and she is potentially losing her home and loses her job at the very beginning of the book, and she has a son and is pregnant with her second child. She ends up getting a job at Carnton, which is this big manor house, and they are putting on a huge auction, which is something they do every year to raise money for the soldiers. And she gets a job as a baker and chef to help organize the events for this auction. And in the meantime, there's also this wounded soldier who is assigned to be a representative at this auction, and he kind of is very skeptical and doesn't understand why these people won't just give money and why they have to have this big hullabaloo. And of course there's a romance that ensues, and it's just a very sweet story. It's Christian fiction, but it wasn't preachy or anything like that, but faith was an aspect of this book. It was just a sweet story for Christmas, and definitely my favorite of the Christmas reads that I read this year. Oh, you know what? I'm going to talk about my audiobook as well, because the book that I listened to on my trip home to New York for Christmas was The Last Christmas in Paris. And I cannot remember the author's name. Oh no, it's Hazel Gaynor is one of the authors, and someone else as well. I'll put a picture of it here so that you can see. This is a novel of letters. Almost the whole novel is made up of these letters about this girl whose brother and brother's best friend go off to fight in World War I believe. We just see these letters between the brother and the friend and her, and a couple other people as well. And it was so amazing to me to feel so connected to characters without all of the extra stuff. We're just simply hearing their words written to each other, and I felt really connected to them. So I thought the main character, I don't remember her name, but I thought she was pretty plucky and tried to bring humor and positivity as she wrote these letters to her brother and his friend. There's a romance that develops, and it's a very slow building friendship. It was just beautiful to watch develop. I was super concerned about things that were happening. It made me very emotional, and I laughed and I cried. I would highly recommend it, and I was pleasantly surprised to enjoy a book that had letters as the main format. I also read 2 YA books this month. The first is The Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor, and this was in my Booktuber Recommends jar that I did as a project in 2017. I was very hesitant to read this book. I was not sure it was going to be something that I would enjoy, and I did really enjoy it. I am planning on continuing on with this series. It's so different. So different from historical fiction or from the things that I normally like to read. It is a fantasy. It is about angels and chimera. Ultimately, there's this girl named Carew who was raised by these other creatures. She has blue hair and she's very artistic and spunky, and she meets this angel, and I forget his name. I can't remember what his name was. But she meets this angel, and for him, it's very insta-love. There's something about her that he just falls in love with right away, of course. But there's a lot more to it than that. No, I didn't really tell you anything that happens, but I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the story way more than I thought I would, and I am looking forward to continuing on with this series. The other YA book that I read this month is The Upside of Unrequited by Becky Albertalli. I can have a hard time saying her last name. This is about a girl named Molly who is a little overweight, and that is mentioned all the time in this book. She has lots of crushes but never pursues it, never says anything to the boys or does anything about it, and is very frustrated that it has never turned into a relationship for her. She also has a very close relationship with her sister, who begins a relationship with another girl, and they kind of are pulled apart a little bit because her sister now has this girlfriend. It was a fun, easy read. It was not anything that blew my mind. I know a lot of people really, really loved this book. It was a happy book. Ultimately, it ends up that Molly has this little love triangle going on by the end of it and feels loved and wanted. And that's important for everybody to feel, but it wasn't anything to write home about, I guess. Guys, I finally accomplished my goal of 2017 of reading through the whole Anne of Green Gables series. I finished reading the 8th book in December, and that was Rilla of Ingleside. And this one was very different from the rest of the series, not only because it just focused on one of Anne's children, Rilla, clearly title character, but this was another World War I story. This one was more historical fiction than any of the others. In most of the series, there's not many dates or timelines thrown out there, so you're not really aware of what else is going on in the rest of the world for the majority of the time. Whereas in this one, this is set right during World War I and what is happening on the home front. And it's really a coming of age story of Rilla. She starts out the book being very self-centered and vain and flighty almost, and by the end of the book really develops into a leader and a woman who has stepped up and made sacrifices in the midst of the war on the home front, on the Canadian home front. It's a little bit slower paced than some of the other ones, but I loved it. I thought this book was wonderful. It was very different, like I said, from the other ones, but I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a great way to wrap up the Anne series. I am so glad that I finished that goal. Yay! The book I read for my Goodreads read-along group in the month of December is Peace Like a River by Leif Enger, and I waited right till the end of the month to finish this up. I wish I had read it sooner in the month so that I could have discussed it a little bit more with people in the group, and I will continue to discuss it. I know there are people still reading it. This book was so beautifully written. By far, it is probably the most beautifully written book I read of the whole year. Leif Enger just has a way with words that was stunning. I found myself rereading sentences and paragraphs even to just catch how he put words together into sentences and into paragraphs. It was just incredibly beautiful. The story is about this man and his children who live in the Midwest, and the oldest son commits a crime near the beginning of the book and ends up escaping from jail. The father and the two other children get into a motorhome and go after him. The father is a man of faith, a very strong faith. He is a prayer warrior, and miracles seem to happen around him. I don't think it's classified as a Christian fiction, but there are very strong elements of faith in this, and his faith is very honest and real. I thought every character in this book had something that set them apart as special. It's narrated by Reuben, the middle son, who's reflecting back on these events in his life. So he's narrating as an adult, which I was glad when Katie from Life Between Words pointed that out to me, because at first I'm like, dude, this does not sound like an 11-year-old kid. It's just, the words were just so evolved and beautiful, and it did not sound like an 11-year-old kid. But the younger sister, Swede, was just precocious and a brilliant poet. She was writing ballad rhyming poetry about this Western, Wild West characters and the villains and guns and shootouts, and it was just so much fun. I loved reading the poems that she was writing and couldn't wait for the next snippets of that. There was just so much about this book that I really loved. The story itself is rather slow paced, but the characters jump out of every page and the writing just blew me away. So I would highly recommend giving this one a go if you like books that are more character than plot driven, or if you just like books that are beautifully written, because this by far is very beautifully written. The last books that I read right at the end of the month, I had finished Peace Like a River, and I still had like 2 or 3 days left, and I didn't want to start another big book, so I finished these from the library that are way overdue. So I finished books 5, 6, and 7 of the Amulet series. This one is Prince of the Elves, and then 6 is Escape from Lucian, and this one is called Firelight. I've really enjoyed reading this series. Graphic novels and I haven't gotten along for the most part. I can't think of any other graphic novels that I truly enjoyed. Maybe Nimona was up there. That was a pretty good one. But I'm really enjoying this story. So ultimately, it's about this girl, Emily, who has become a stonekeeper. And as the story goes on, we learn a lot more about stonekeepers and about this world that they've landed in, and if the stones are really helpful or if they are evil. That is kind of the ultimate question that is being asked. The artistry is really beautiful in these books. I know I've said that before. The colors are just really bright. The characters are a lot of fun. Deal a lot with almost racism, particularly between the elves and the other creatures. It deals with good and evil and differences, and it's just a fun adventure story with some gorgeous writing. So they're quick reads. If you're ever interested in trying a graphic novel, maybe pick up the Amulet series and see what you think. 7 of these books from my list this month are library books, and guess what? They're all overdue. Yikes! There you have it, folks. These are the books that I read in the month of December. I am so thrilled that I ended the year reading just over 100 books, which is so much fun. I would love to hear from you. How are you starting out your reading in January? Have you read something really good at the beginning of the year, or have you been finishing up something you started last year? I would love to chat with you about that down in the comments. As always, I love chatting with you down there, and I'll be talking to you in another video very soon. Bye. Look at that bright light. It's like a halo. Ah.